Hello. 6 days from the signing of the peace deal between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia, what does the peace deal promise to the region, and how do the sides, and whether if the deal is being honored so far? We'll be discussing these issues with the former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan, Matthew Bryza. Mr. Bryza has always served as the U.S. co-chair in OSCE Minsk group. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. We appreciate that.
Yeah, it's really an honor always to be with you. Thank you.
Ambassador, I'd like to start with the peace deal that was signed on November the 10th, and how would you characterize it? Do you think it's a peace agreement? Do you think it's the end of the war, of the conflict?
Well, it is certainly the end of the military phase of the conflict, number one. And every war that ever comes to a conclusion always does so through a political agreement, right? Because again, as we talked about last time on this great program, war is the continuation of politics by other means. So any countries fight wars because they have political objectives in mind. So this is an agreement that lays out a framework for a final political agreement of the conflict, but is not that final agreement yet. But it lays out the basic principles of a final political settlement. I would also characterize it as both the military phase so far of the conflict, and then this ceasefire agreement and framework agreement as the greatest military and diplomatic achievements in independent Azerbaijan's history. I mean, what else quite this dramatic? And I say that from the perspective, as you said, Sevinch, as a former U.S. co-chair of the Minsk group. This agreement is fundamentally the basic principles that the co-chairs put on the table in November 2007 at the Madrid meeting of the foreign ministers of the OSCE. It has some differences. In fact, it has more in favor of Azerbaijan, as you'd expect, because Azerbaijan won the military phase of the war, and that's how warfare works. So the additional thing is the corridor, the transit corridor from Nakhchivan to the rest of Azerbaijan. That's one difference. And the other difference is there's no reference in this November 10th agreement
We're experiencing technical difficulty. We'll lost you for a while there.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, let's go back. Tell me where you lost me.
We said that there were certain differences, including the Nakhchivan corridor.
Good. Okay. And the second one, yeah, I could see on my screen too where it froze. The second one is that there's no explicit mention in this agreement of the legal status of the residual pieces of Nagorno-Karabakh that remain under Armenian control for now. I hope our Azerbaijani friends don't worry too much about that. I think that at the end of the day, Armenian troops are going to have no choice but to leave those areas. Khojaven, Agdere, Hankendi, they're going to have to leave because they're not going to have any way to be supplied over time. Azerbaijan's leverage is enormous, bigger than it's ever been. But in the short run, at this immediate moment, it's a positive factor, in my opinion, from the perspective as a former mediator, as well as ambassador to Azerbaijan, that at least in theory, even if it never happens, in theory, Azerbaijan is saying, okay, we're not going to stipulate in this agreement that there's no chance that we could ever have negotiations on the legal status of these residual regions of Nagorno-Karabakh where Armenian troops are still present, because the reality is going to be those troops are going to leave. And so in the meantime, Azerbaijan, if it leaves open just the theoretical possibility of such discussions, it is building a huge reservoir of international goodwill that will help it change the narrative that's still out there. It's still out there in Washington and in European capitals so inaccurately that Azerbaijan is somehow the aggressor. So that political narrative needs to change. The truth needs to come out, going all the way back to 1988, so that the world then understands that Azerbaijan has never been the aggressor. So I think I characterize the agreement as this great diplomatic achievement for Azerbaijan for those reasons.
Ambassador, I'm glad that you mentioned that about the arms and the military remaining in Nagorno-Karabakh, because as of today, first of all, there were the concerns that the agreement does not lay out as a condition, as an important condition, that all arms, all the troops have to leave Nagorno-Karabakh. But today, over these past 6 days, we've seen continuation of this military rhetoric. As a matter of fact, even today, the separatist leader in Nagorno-Karabakh said that the army, so-called army of so-called Nagorno-Karabakh, remains and will continue and will improve. So what makes you think that the Azerbaijan, these illegal troops, illegal army will be disarmed, that they will not be, on the contrary, helped, so to speak, by the Russian peacekeepers that are there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mr. Harutyunyan and Prime Minister Pashinyan, they are fighting for their lives, both political and physical. I mean, we all know about the assassination attempt that was apparently organized against Pashinyan. Now, maybe that's Pashinyan just trying to save himself politically, but I think it's true, and I expected something like that. So the first point is, don't worry too much about that rhetoric. Mr. Harutyunyan and Pashinyan, they're trying to save themselves. The second key point is that Azerbaijan won the military phase and wisely dictated the peace. I believe that it was Ilham Aliyev who dictated to Vladimir Putin that the peace agreement needs to be the basic principles that all throughout the war, President Aliyev has said this is Azerbaijan's goal, which is return all occupied Azerbaijani lands immediately to Azerbaijan, immediately, now. And then you can have the corridor linking, Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh, and you have peacekeepers, although we never, as the Minsk group co-chairs, foresaw that there would be Russian peacekeepers. We all actually agreed there wouldn't be Russian peacekeepers, but leave that aside. This is, a different emergency moment in time. But after capturing Shusha, or regaining Shusha, not capturing it, but regaining Shusha, the reality on the ground militarily was there's no way Armenia could ever win. And so the soldiers that remain in those regions of Nagorno-Karabakh are simply face-saving measures. They can play no role. They can't even get resupplied unless Azerbaijan agrees to do it, right? Because Azerbaijan controls Shusha. Yes, I agree with you, Sevinch. Russia may want to try to provide them with certain limited resupply capabilities, but they will never gain the ability ever to launch a military offensive against Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has won decisively, and as I said, has dictated the peace along the lines it wants, although there will be Russian peacekeepers, and we'll come to this, I know, this next point in a second, but, while there will be Russian peacekeepers in a limited role, there will be Turkish peacekeepers in a role as well. And since 1796, Turkey has wanted to get back into the South Caucasus with its troops, and Russia has opposed it, and Putin had to agree to that. That is a gigantic diplomatic loss for Russia, in addition to the fact that it is Russia's weapons on the battlefield, including highly advanced ones like S-300 air defense systems, that Azerbaijan so effectively destroyed. So Azerbaijan has shown that its technology acquired from Turkey and Israel, and its tactics that it figured out itself based on what Turkey did in Idlib, Syria, and what the United States did in Afghanistan using special forces to occupy the high ground, worked and completely undermined the Russian weapons on which Armenia relied, as well as Armenia's extensive static defenses. So to put it in a simple way and shorter way, if the Armenian residual troops want to play any games, Azerbaijan has demonstrated that it can win the day, carry the battle against them. And it would be a suicidal mission by any residual Armenian troops in Nagorno-Karabakh to try to fight the Azerbaijanis. So without sacrificing any more Azerbaijani lives, no more young men from Azerbaijan have to die in battle to get rid of those Armenian troops that remain in Nagorno-Karabakh. President Aliyev, I think, has been able to secure the political victory that has to end all wars. But I understand this is not a popular decision right now in Azerbaijan, and people are full of euphoria and would like to see the war continue. But those men in Azerbaijan who are saying those things should volunteer and go to the front and be the first ones to fight if that's what they really want to do.
Master, I remember in our last interview you said that yes, Azerbaijan has demonstrated that it has the military capacity to liberate all its occupied territories, including Konkendi, Askeran, Agdara, but it should stop. Well, that happened. Azerbaijan indeed was very close to liberating Konkendi, Stepanakert as well. It stopped, but what we've seen in the past 6 days is, as we mentioned, military rhetoric continued. The separatist regime is not backing down. It's continuing its rhetoric that we're there, we're going to fight, the war is going to continue. That is not being anticipated.
Yeah, I think that's folly. And I understand why, as I was saying a moment ago, I think the Karabakh authorities are trying to save themselves politically and physically. And I think it's ridiculous. I mean, they lost. And I mean, it's not just that they lost this war. Again, as I was saying a moment ago, Turkey and Azerbaijan together and Israel with Israeli technology demonstrated that against these new capabilities and tactics, Russian technologies are obsolete. They can't withstand this sort of flexible, creative, technology-based attack by Azerbaijan. So say what you wish, authorities of Nagorno-Karabakh, or I mean, not authorities, but Armenian ethnic representatives in Nagorno-Karabakh. Say what you want, but I hope that Azerbaijanis will just ignore it and understand that Azerbaijan won. And won decisively, and won, in fact, so decisively, as I myself have been writing, that this use of novel technologies and tactics changes the very nature of warfare. And it's relying on sophisticated air defense systems and sophisticated armor is not enough anymore if you don't have the ability to conceal your highest valued military assets using electronic capabilities. Armenia lacks those, and Azerbaijan's acquired from Turkey and Israel were superior to those of Russia. That is a profound shift in geopolitics.
Master, I announced that you will be the guest of our program today, and our patrons sent their questions, and the most popular question for you is, who do you think are the winners and losers in this peace deal? I would let you decide on the order yourself.
Well, I mean, you can tell from my last response who I think the winner was, but let's start with the losers. I mean, okay, obviously Armenia suffered, I think its greatest strategic defeat since the Bolsheviks took over Armenia. And you could argue societally, culturally, in every way, it's the biggest defeat since 1915. And Pashinyan personally will suffer terribly, as will Harutyunyan in Khankendi. Their political careers are certainly Pashinyan's is over. And he is, as we mentioned before, fighting to avoid physical destruction. So that's incredible. It will take, who knows, decades, I think, for Armenia to absorb what a profound defeat this is, and how this national myth of the invincibility of the Armenian army and the inability of Azerbaijanis to fight, that's just like that's so deep in their mentality that I think it'll take, as I said, a couple of decades. There's also so much hatred in the soon-to-be former residents of the occupied territories and Nagorno-Karabakh who are leaving. And we see that in Kalabajar, right? I mean, all the international news services are filled with video evidence of the Armenians before they leave. They're slaughtering their livestock, cutting down forests, burning their houses, destroying the electricity infrastructure to make sure that when Azerbaijanis return to their homes, there's nothing there for them. That to me, that is the ultimate sign of the deepest possible defeat. You don't just, they're not just thanking God for the chance to escape with the lives of themselves, their families, but they want to hurt the Azerbaijanis who are doing nothing more in the future than returning to their own homes that these people occupied in violation of international law. So that is such a huge loss morally. So clearly, that's the biggest loser, to use the term of an American reality TV show. I think the other three, well, I think the United States and France lost in this and won. They lost because they were marginalized because of their inactivity, and especially President Macron's, full-scale tilt toward Armenia in this conflict, which completely negated France's ability to maintain its status as an impartial mediator. But they also gained because the conflict is on its way to a final political settlement that fundamentally and ultimately is fair for both sides, because its terms, no matter how much Pashinyan wants to disagree, were agreed by his predecessor, Serge Sarkisyan, in January 2009 in principle. Russia is also in a mixed situation. As I said before, I think that it's a huge geopolitical loss for Russia to now be on record as accepting Turkish military forces on the territory of the South Caucasus of Azerbaijan. That takes us back a couple of centuries and overturns Russian policy for all those years. On the other hand, President Putin brokered the agreement and showed that among himself and Macron and Trump, he's the one who really mattered. And he was able to bring the fighting to a close and get his peacekeepers also on the ground, which, as I said in the beginning, is that is a big price to be paid by Azerbaijan, absolutely, because of the nefarious role that Russian peacekeepers have played, as we've seen in Georgia, in Moldova, and yeah, well, that's good enough. But also, if you look really carefully at the agreement and think about it, the Russian peacekeepers, as far as the Lachin corridor goes, will be guarding the 2.5 kilometers on each side of the road, but not the road itself. The road itself, its security, will be maintained by Azerbaijani forces and police. So de facto, the role of the Russian peacekeepers is going to be to keep the Armenian troops, or whoever's left, not troops anymore in Lachin and Kalabajar, but Armenian partisans that may still be floating around, away from the corridor. And so providing a protection against any nefarious actions any Armenian partisans might want to take. Interesting. Turkey is a huge winner in this as well, for the reason I stated. Turkey is going to get its military forces on the territory of Azerbaijan and working together with Russia in the peacekeeping monitoring center, whatever it's called. I mean, that whole provision of the agreement was created only because Turkey wanted it and wanted to have a way to be present politically and militarily. And throughout all my years working on this region, including overseeing U.S. policy toward Turkey at both the White House and State Department, my Turkish colleagues and superior colleagues, I mean, even the presidential level, were always looking for a way to get Turkey involved in the mediation process of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And that was never Never possible because of Armenia's objections. But now Turkey is at the center. So Turkey wins in a serious way. Turkey also wins because of the corridor from Nakhchivan, which means a corridor essentially from Turkey across Armenia to the rest of Azerbaijan. But of course, the biggest winner is Azerbaijan. And that's why the people of Azerbaijan were demonstrating with such joy. And Armenians recognize that as well, given how distraught they are over this agreement and calling for Pashinyan's resignation, even perhaps trying to assassinate him. So no matter how upset some may be in Azerbaijan, that there still will be this residual influence of Armenia in some parts of Nagorno-Karabakh for a limited amount of time. Azerbaijan has won, again, the biggest diplomatic and military victory in its history. And as I also mentioned, I think, in fact, I know that these basic principles that form the foundation of this agreement are something that Azerbaijan has wanted since 2007. And the fact that President Putin flipped, and in the October 10th ceasefire agreement that he brokered, and in this one, brought the basic principles back in, and that he never supported Armenia in this conflict, and that so many Armenians are saying Russia sold out Armenia, I think that all speaks for itself in underscoring what a powerful victory this was for Azerbaijan. And so now the greatest victory in peace would be if Azerbaijan could convince a significant number of Armenians that they can be safe, that they can prosper in peace if they remain in their homes, and welcome back, as bitter as that may be, at some point over time, welcome back their former Azerbaijani neighbors as they return to their former homes. And if that happens, this will be something that historians will write about around the world for forever, because it would be an absolutely unusual, maybe even unique example of healing these bitter wounds and bringing back together peoples who used to live together and then fought such brutal wars against each other. I'm not naive enough to believe that's going to happen in the next year or decade, but I think that what was agreed on November 10th lays the foundation for that, at least to be a possibility.
Ambassador, Turkey is not mentioned in November 10th statement at all, but you mentioned that there will be a peace center created, that Turkey will also be involved, and yet we're hearing from Russian official statements like Turkey will not be involved in Nagorno-Karabakh, that no soldier will be involved, that this will be remote control over the situation. So what is going on? What can you tell us about the tension and between Russia and Turkey on this issue? And also, what positive role do you expect the Turkish troops can play in preserving the peace?
Well, point one would be that Russia doesn't get a vote as to whether or not Turkish troops will come to Azerbaijan. That's up to Azerbaijan. And there's no chance that Russia is going to shoot down troop transporting planes from Turkey to, whether it be to Ganja or to Baku or wherever they go. If Turkey wants to send its troops into Azerbaijan, that's going to happen. And Turkey has proven in Idlib, Syria, and in Libya that it is ready to fight and kill. Sorry to be so blunt, but fight and kill Russian troops on the ground using its unmanned aerial vehicles to gather intelligence and to deliver weapons, and also to guide heavy artillery that's in a standoff position. So I think Turkey is, if it wants to put its troops on the ground, it's going to, number one. Number two, I love you asked the question about the tension of the negotiations. I think Foreign Minister Lavrov, when he mentioned the unmanned aerial vehicles, like today or yesterday, I think what he is signaling is he hopes there won't be physical Turkish troops on the ground anywhere near where the Armenians are residually and temporarily going to be, because of obvious reasons, right? And so I think he's instead saying that Turkey's drone capabilities are extensive and could be an important contribution to the peacekeeping operation. And I would guess he's also saying he hopes that that's where it will end. But he must realize. I mean, I work very closely with Minister Lavrov and respect him quite a bit. But of course, he understands how much leverage Turkey now has over the situation. And I think that even though in Washington, many people, even President-elect Biden, has complained about Turkey's support for Azerbaijan, I think that eventually Washington should understand that if Russia is going to have its peacekeepers on the ground, it's really good for NATO if Turkey has its own personnel on the ground as well as a counterbalance. And it's really good for Azerbaijan as well.
Speaking of Biden, he did say a lot of biased anti-Azerbaijan, pro-Armenian statements, but that was before he was elected. As a statesman, what do you anticipate from the new administration's policy, and also the very fact that OSCE Minsk group was not really part of the November 10 deal signing? Do you think US and France will try to catch up?
Yeah, really good points. This was such a close election in the United States, and President-elect Biden was looking for every pocket of votes he could find, and everybody on this broadcast knows how well organized Armenian Americans are, as well as Greek Americans, and he also in the past has also kind of tilted toward Armenian Americans and Greek Americans in their disputes with Turkey, in the Greek case, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and with Greek Cypriots as well, with regard to the Eastern Mediterranean, and on these issues as well in the South Caucasus. So, having worked with him directly, although a while ago when I served in Moscow, and having hosted him at our embassy for 3 days, I mean, I know from my own experience how systematically he thinks. I mean, as a strategic thinker, how important NATO is to his way of thinking, and therefore, by default, how important Turkey is as NATO's second largest military, and by extension, how important Azerbaijan is. So I think that as this contentious American election fades, he will be able to get back to being so strategic. Another way to look at it is, and this is why one of the reasons my nomination to be ambassador to Azerbaijan was blocked in the Senate, was that then President Biden promised to recognize the events of 1915 as genocide, and then he didn't, because he recognized, of course, once in office, just as you said, Sevinch, the enormous weight and responsibility of that office, and the strategic importance of Turkey, and therefore the strategic importance of not resolving an historical debate that should be left to historians. And so because Obama didn't live up to his promise during the campaign to recognize those events as genocide, then that was part of the reason why the Armenian National Committee of America, which is the Dashnak Situn representation in the United States, fought to have my nomination blocked. So I think, though, that in the same way that Obama got into office and he didn't recognize the Armenian genocide, Biden himself will also fall into understanding all these strategic realities. So I'm not so worried. I think it's going to work out quite well. But it'll take, there might be a bumpy start, and Azerbaijan, by implementing this agreement, and by having proposed it, has put itself in a really strong position to gain Biden's support, because Azerbaijan showed such strategic restraint and has given the occupiers of the 7 surrounding regions, as well as Nagorno-Karabakh, a chance to leave, and even more time now, right? 10 more days to depart Kaldachar. I think that's really smart diplomatically. If your goal in Baku, or if one of your goals, is to attract the support of the U.S. president.
About OSCE Minsk group, and the U.S. President's advisor mentioned that he was having talks with Scandinavians about possible peacekeeper contribution. Do you still see the potential for that? Can this change?
No, since National Security Advisor O'Brien uttered that somewhat baffling statement. I haven't seen anything further, and I think that events move so quickly on the ground. Only Russia was ready immediately to provide peacekeepers, and by the way, those peacekeepers were immediately needed. I think now that the agreement's been reached, neither Russia nor Turkey are going to want anybody else to come in. As for the Minsk group, it has no role except for one thing, which I'll come to, but it has no role because the basic principles that it or we negotiated with both Armenia and Azerbaijan are now agreed by virtue of the November 10th agreement. The only possible role now for the Minsk group, in my mind, would be if there are any sort of face-saving negotiations on the legal status of those portions of Nagorno-Karabakh that are not yet under Azerbaijani control. That could be a very useful function of the Minsk group, though much more limited than before. But otherwise, the geopolitical reality has shifted, and as we were talking about last time, since late July, when there were those clashes between Azerbaijan and Armenia on their international border, it was clear that Russia and Turkey were filling a diplomatic vacuum left by the U.S., France, and anybody else. So that's the new reality.
The people I talk in Azerbaijan are not thrilled about Russian peacekeepers on the ground. And as you mentioned, they were so quick to move in, literally minutes after signing. And given the whole background of Russian troops in Azerbaijan since Soviet times. And you mentioned that neither Russia nor Turkey will give up their roles in peacekeepers, but do you think that at least the mandate of Russian peacekeepers can be changed or indeed be made public, that they will be obliged to refrain from any military and otherwise support to the separatist regimes? At least, do you see these things can be worked out at this stage?
At this stage, I can't see that far into the future. I mean, we all know the nefarious role Russian peacekeepers played in Moldova and Georgia, as I already mentioned. And now, personally, I mean, in August 2007, I remember sitting down to dinner at 11 o'clock at night in Washington and getting a call from the then Georgian foreign minister telling me that Russian peacekeepers had interspersed themselves between the Georgian army and South Ossetian separatists, and had enabled the separatists to fire artillery over the heads of the Russian peacekeepers on the Georgian troops, to leave the Georgians in a horrible dilemma of either doing nothing or of potentially killing Russian troops who would then retaliate. And by the way, for a while, the Georgians did nothing, and then they finally retaliated, and then Russia unfurled its full invasion. So I think Russian peacekeepers anywhere in general are a terrible idea. But war is brutal. And in this situation, there was an urgent need for immediate need for peacekeepers, and only Russia was able to provide them. That's because it had been planning to do so for a long time. And who knows how they'll behave in the future. But the whole point is, by having Turkish peacekeepers also on the ground, that is a gigantic counterbalance. Russia has fought and basically stopped against Turkish troops in both Syria and Libya, because Turkey was able to defeat them and kill a lot of them. And I'm not in favor of warfare at all. I mean, it's horrible. Any of these deaths is horrible. But Turkey proved itself, and I think Russia understands that. And also, there's one other subtle point to understand, and this I heard from Andrei Ilyaronov, who's former Putin advisor and now his political enemy, lives in Washington, D.C. at the Cato Institute, but he's brilliant. And he said he believes that what was the original Russian plan was to send peacekeepers from the 102nd Army Base in Gyumri, Armenia, into the zone of conflict, which politically would have been a really bad thing for Azerbaijan, right? Think of the symbolism. The Russian base in Armenia and their troops go in and become the peacekeepers on Azerbaijani territory. Now, who knows if this is true, but he believes that the shooting down of that Mi-24 helicopter that was, in the midst of the conflict at the end, was done as a signal to Russia not to bring those troops from Gyumri, because according to Andrei and others, that MiG-24, that Mi-24 was accompanying a column of Russian troops from Gyumri that were going to be the peacekeepers. So instead, at the end of the day, the peacekeeping contingent is from Ulyanovsk, 1,500 kilometers from the conflict zone. They're the ones who've come in at expense. I mean, they fly to Armenia, to Erubeni, then they transfer and they drive in. I think Russia, for purely logistical reasons and political reasons, would have preferred to use the troops from the 102nd Army Base in Armenia. So as disconcerting as it is to have Russian peacekeepers on Azerbaijani territory, I think some steps have been taken to limit the damage thereof. And then how the next round of this all plays out in the future remains to be seen.
And yesterday, Armenia asked for 10 more days to liberate the Kalbarjar region. At the same time, we know that the talks between Ankara and Russia still continue behind closed doors about the peace mission, Turkish and Russian Peacekeeper. Do you see any link between them? Do you think it's a coordinated delay? You know, one dictates the other one, and the second part of the question: do you think the other parts of the deal will also take longer than it was planned?
Well, I think, and I can't tell if my screen is frozen here. I heard you perfectly, though. There we go. Yeah, I'm back. Okay.
We're fine, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would be purely speculating if I commented on what I think, you know, the Russian and Turkish governments discussed during these meetings on Friday and Saturday in Ankara. But it's hard to believe that they didn't discuss what you just mentioned. You know, in fact, the Turkish government said they did discuss the so-called modalities of how the peacekeeping operation would work, but they didn't mention anything about Kalbajar. But to me, you know, of course, the Russian side would want a delay, right, so that the Armenian people, who are, you know, their clients, have a chance to have a more orderly, complete upheaval of their lives and can take a little more time to evacuate. That seems reasonable to me. And I would also guess that the government of Azerbaijan would recognize, from a humanitarian perspective, that it's also reasonable, and it's certainly not against Azerbaijan's national interest to be seen as magnanimous in the international community. Quite the contrary. That's a big plus. And, you know, it's clear that the Armenians are leaving Kalbajar. They're burning down their houses. They're not going to stay. So why not give them some more time? I mean, I think it's only a positive for Azerbaijan, and it really helps Azerbaijan's reputation look stronger. So I don't think there's any dictating here. I would guess that Aliyev and Putin realized, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Events, and particularly protests at the central Yerevan demanding resignation of Pashinyan. Do you think this development can jeopardize the implementation of the deal? Whoever replaces Pashinyan may consider implementation differently?
That's a great question. And well, all your questions are great, but in the short run, I don't think so. In the short run, Putin's prestige is totally tied up with this agreement, right? I mean, you know, he brokered it. Not sure whether he pushed it on Aliyev or not. I think maybe the opposite is true for a lot of those components. But he always wanted a settlement on the basis of the basic principles. Putin is happy if Pashinyan is gone, as you and I discussed during our last conversation. So, you know, I think whoever will come in Pashinyan's place will be somebody that, how to put it, that doesn't make Moscow uncomfortable. And so for the foreseeable future, I think Moscow, or the Kremlin at least, is going to want this peace agreement to be implemented, and then maybe even go to the next phase, which is to negotiate a final political settlement, because this is just a framework agreement, right? The final peace treaty still needs to be negotiated, and I'm sure Moscow should play a big role in that, as I hope will France and the US, the other Minsk group co-chairs, or maybe if not France, maybe the EU could step in France's place. But longer into the more distant future, yeah, it's hard to predict what will happen. How long will Putin be in power? How successfully will Russia leverage its peacekeeping presence? How successfully will Turkey and Azerbaijan counter that with Turkey's presence on the ground? What will be the political dynamic in Armenia? I mean, my guess is, Sevinch, that what we're going to see is not only this new corridor from Nakhchivan to the rest of Azerbaijan, but we're also going to see at some point soon a normalization of Turkey-Armenia relations, right? I mean, we all remember what happened in October of 2009, and having been in the middle of that process as well for part of the time, I know for a fact, based on my own conversations with the highest possible leaders in Turkey, that Turkey was only going to agree to that normalization with Armenia if there was a breakthrough in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict resolution process. And that breakthrough has come. Everything we'd negotiated and had preliminarily agreed is now agreed on the basis of the November 10th agreement. And so I think Turkey then is going to have a chance, if it wishes to reopen its border. And I think it will soon. And then imagine that. Imagine how that changes the geopolitical dynamic. Armenians, I think, overwhelmingly feel that Russia betrayed them, right? Under the CSTOs. Russia is supposed to be Armenia's ally. Okay, even though the fighting didn't take place on Armenian territory, but on Azerbaijani territory, I think the vast number of Armenians feel betrayed. And they feel that they can't rely on Russia ever again. So couple that with reopening the border to Turkey, which gives Armenia a direct or an indirect, but a way to get to Europe, right? Across Turkish territory and into Greece, where they enjoy a great deal of support. That changes the geopolitical dynamic dramatically. I mean, it overturns, again, the last 2 centuries of geopolitical reality in the South Caucasus. And so I wouldn't worry too much if I were an Azerbaijani right now. I think the opportunities are enormous to create a much better situation for Azerbaijan and for the whole region.
And my last question, question that is in the minds of a lot of Azeris these days, and that is, why did Azerbaijan stop when Azerbaijan was so close to liberating all of its lands, including Khankendi? And one of my patrons is asking what would be the repercussions if Azerbaijan did not stop and liberate all its lands. And my question to you, what do you think made Aliyev stop?
Yeah, great questions. I think the repercussions provide the answer to the question of why Aliyev stopped. The repercussions would have been, I fear, that Azerbaijan would have been treated as an international pariah. If it kept pushing, and if there were large-scale civilian casualties, and even if it was simply a case of just Azerbaijan driving its military forces all the way and vanquishing the Armenian side, that would have contributed to the false narrative since the late 1980s and early 1990s that Azerbaijan is the aggressor. It's not fair and it's not accurate, but it has been the reality. So that's one point. The second point is, I hope your patrons and everybody in Azerbaijan wanting there to have been a fight to the end realize how brutal the fighting was at the end. This reliance on drones and artillery strikes that created such success early in the conflict was no longer possible as Azerbaijani forces were approaching Shusha. A, because of the weather, and B, because of the terrain. I mean, anybody who knows that area, I've been there many, many times, realizes it is treacherous terrain from a military perspective. It's not just mountainous. I mean, there are narrow gorges, and it's forested, and so forces can conceal themselves. It's very difficult to employ the weaponry that Azerbaijan used so excessively in the flat Karabakh rather than mountainous Karabakh. And it's just brutal to talk about it. But the hospital reports in Khankendi were, the people coming in, the soldiers, overwhelmingly had knife wounds, not artillery wounds, not bullets, knives. So young Azerbaijani men, special forces, young Armenian men were beating each other and stabbing each other to death in those forests. And that's what President Aliyev had to consider if the fight were to continue beyond Khankendi and then into those other regions, Agdere and Khojavend. And so that's a moral decision he had to take, right? Sacrifice these willing patriots, sacrifice their lives and their families' futures, or end the fighting when we've won, from his perspective, right? He's thinking Azerbaijan has won. There's no way Armenia can ever win this war. So is the marginal benefit of so many more young Azerbaijani men's lives worth it? Just to say, ha ha, we went all the way, when in fact you're going to get that anyway at the end of the day. So I think that was his calculation. And you know, as a diplomatic professional, I think that's wise. Again, going back to the beginning, as von Clausewitz, the great 19th century Prussian strategist, taught everyone, war is the continuation of politics by other means. What are your political goals? Those have been achieved by Azerbaijan, right? All the territories are being returned. Nagorno-Karabakh itself, de facto, is under total Azerbaijani control, even if there's this fig leaf that some Armenian control remains, sorry. So why spend more lives, not to mention money, but lives, to gain this marginal benefit? Politically, that doesn't make any sense at all. So I think that's why Azerbaijan stopped, and what it gained for itself will soon be, I think, a new narrative about Azerbaijan not being the aggressor, about Azerbaijan showing strategic restraint, and about Armenia wanting to continue the fight in a suicidal way, even if after the battle was over.
Ambassador Matthew Bryza, thank you very much.
And I thank you so much, Sydney.